In today's episode, we have a special guest, someone who not only has a label, but helps others with the label as well. We will discover how Justin has utilized community and mentors throughout his life to help him live beyond type 1 diabetes, and now allowing him to share with others. Type 1 diabetes was not something he would have chosen, but his story will show you how he is now living beyond. Welcome, Justin. So glad to have you on the show today.
Thanks. I'm glad to be here. Thanks for having me, Hope. It's an honor.
Yeah, absolutely. So I know, Justin, and you'll kind of hear throughout the interview that we met through basically community. So it's pretty cool. But before even jumping ahead and talking about that, share with us kind of your diabetes diagnosis story, or just kind of who you are and all that fun stuff related to you, but also I feel like this might have a lot of laughter in it.
A little bit. I'm kind of a funny guy, and Hope gets to laugh along. So, yeah. So, we could actually be here this entire time just talking about me and how awesome I am. But, for me right now, I'm 34, going on 35 years old. I was diagnosed with diabetes when I was 10 years old. So it has certainly been the majority of my life that I've been living and managing this disease and dealing with this label that I've had ever since I was 10 years old. Right now, it's the biggest thing in my world has got to be my wife and my 4-month-old daughter. What kind of keeps me going and motivates me to do a lot of things, to continue to grow as a person and also in my career. They really keep the focus for me going. So I love those things. I love to have fun. I've got a ton of friends that also are dealing with the same label. It's kind of where I've come from. So, my diagnosis was actually when I was age 10. I think I just mentioned that. And I was spending a couple weeks with a cousin in Kentucky. And while I was spending that time there, I was going to bed later and later at night, waking up super late in the afternoon. It was unlike, most of your normal preteens where they are sleeping in during the summer. I mean, I'm waking up at 2:00 and, I've got a giant cup of water beside my bed every night that I'm just guzzling. And then, of course, I'm going to the bathroom frequently. So my mom and a friend of hers came to Kentucky to pick me up, and they were driving from Charlotte, driving back to Charlotte was where they were taking me. And that was about a 9 to 10 hour drive. And along that drive, we probably stopped so I could use the bathroom maybe 15 to 20 times. It got to the point where those last few hours, it was every 15 to 20 minutes that I had to go and use the bathroom. So what would happen was every time that I had to stop and use the bathroom, I was incredibly thirsty. And so I would get something to drink. And every time I got something to drink, I didn't go and grab a bottled water. I was 10 years old. I was grabbing another soda or a juice or a high C or something, a milkshake, something like that, to just kind of quench that thirst that I had that would never go away. And my mom knew. She definitely knew. I've got a grandmother on my father's side who her and all 7 or 8 of her siblings were diagnosed with type 1 diabetes as well. So my mom, she really had a gut feeling, and she didn't share that with me. But she did make an appointment, and we went to the doctor later that week once we got back. And that's where I first remember having my blood sugar checked and looking at the meter to see what it was. It wasn't sky high. I don't have one of those exciting numbers like 1,700
Right.
or anything like that. I think I was in the mid 200s at the time. But then, of course, next thing I know is that, hey, we're heading off to the hospital to go meet with an endocrinologist about what was going to be the rest of my life. And that was, it's one of those moments where you can remember exactly where you were, exactly what you were doing. I remember the cookies that I laid out on the table before we went to that doctor's appointment. And my mom said, hold off on eating those until we get back. I can actually remember it that vividly. So it completely changed everything in my world. I had a basketball game the very next morning. And I remember thinking, this might be my last basketball game ever if I'm allowed to play in it. So it was that big of a shock. There were so many questions, lots of them, some that still haven't been answered. But fortunately for me, the majority of those questions have been answered along the past, 25 years. Can't believe it.
Wow. Yeah, that's crazy. So you We're so young. That's insane. And I'm sure, obviously, you just kind of touched upon basketball, but did you feel like anything else kind of changed or any dramatic changes in your life? So currently, you're saying, priorities, what you love is having fun and your wife and your 4-month-old daughter. But at that time, did anything that you love change?
Oh yeah, lots of things that I love changed. School changed immediately. This was a summer diagnosis. I mentioned I was in Kentucky in the summer, and going back to school, the first thing is, well, you have to tell your teacher that you have diabetes. And I'm like, nope, not doing that. So my parents had to do that. And then it's, are you going to tell any of your friends? And I'm like, nope, not doing that. But you know, kids are nosy and they like to find out what's different between each other and kind of pick on those things. I moved into that phase where I'm like, I'm hiding my diabetes. I don't want any of my friends to know about it. I don't want any of my teammates on my basketball team or football team to know about it. I just wanted to be a normal kid. All of those things were giant changes. And I mean, it was a night and day for me immediately. If I had to eat a snack because my blood sugar's low, I'm like, I can just wait. I can hold off. I can wait a little while longer before I have that snack. Or if it was between me checking my blood sugar in front of my friends or not doing that, I'm not checking my blood sugar. I'll wait until they're all gone and I'm back home. Those were some night and day changes, and then of course, food just takes on a completely different meaning in the world to everybody that has diabetes.
Mm-hmm.
Fortunately for me, when I was young, I was so involved in sports and extracurricular activities that I was able to really stay in great shape as a kid. Not as much anymore. That's not one you're supposed to laugh at.
Well, you laughed and I followed.
I know. That was one of the things that was fortunate for me. But the food aspect, everything that you're eating from pizza, because kids love pizza everywhere kids are. Adults think, yes, we're going to order pizza. I'm guilty of the same thing. You've seen it. So there's pizza everywhere. There are sodas everywhere. Being giant kid, who's extremely healthy looking and just got done playing, in a tournament over the weekend, and you go and you ask for a Diet Coke. That's like a jarring change to people. And then sometimes, being like, you know what, forget this. I'm not even going to worry about ordering a diet. If everybody else has a regular soda or whatever that's on the table, I'm just going to go with that too.
Mm.
That's one of those immediate changes that's more of a mental change and an emotional change than anything else. Some of the physical changes I think are almost easier to deal with than having to deal with some of that mental and emotional fallout, which for me took years. Absolutely.
Yeah, I couldn't agree with that more, especially with the emotional aspect of things, and not even as just a child, but as you get older and you have something that is lifelong. I will say you can control your diabetes, but mentally sometimes there are so many barriers and difficult times, and obviously as a kid wanting to be normal and talking about feeling normal, I feel like. So one way that you and I met was through camp. And I know kind of your story, but like obviously things were changing. You didn't feel normal, so you were doing things that probably weren't in your best interest for your health at the time. What was kind of that moment that your mom or your parents decided like, okay, we need to find other people that Justin can relate to?
Yeah. For me, oh boy. When I was diagnosed at 10, I went to camp the very next year. And so I was still 10, going on 11. I had my birthday at camp. I went to camp and I was kicking and screaming. I was one of those kids that has no desire to be around anybody else that has diabetes. My entire diabetes outlook was really based on my grandmother and all of her siblings having had diabetes. And so I mentioned that because it was not, I never met any of my grandmother's siblings, as I recall it. Maybe when I was very, very young, I had a chance to meet them. But, for the part of my life that I can remember, I had never met any of them. And it was because diabetes was, what eventually contributed to their passing. I was fortunate my grandmother was around for a long time and diabetes was was not something that ended up taking her out of the picture. But all I knew was, this disease is going to kill me, or, the horror stories that you hear from doctors immediately after you're diagnosed of losing your eyesight, losing limbs. Those horror stories that was all I had. So when I went to camp, it was just like, hey, wait a minute, this place is fun, first and foremost. And then on top of that, there was the 150, 160 other kids that had diabetes and were just like me, wanting to have fun, wanting to enjoy their summer. And then for me, it was a counselor who sat down, and I never for a second thought that he had diabetes. And he sat down before our first meal and he checked his blood sugar. And I was like, wait a minute. That was that light bulb moment for me. Like all of a sudden you have diabetes. And so this guy that I knew was probably in his 20s, like very early 20s, if that, going to school. I thought he was cool, even though he went to Carolina.
Oh, okay. That's rude.
Yeah. Yeah. That's the truth. I mean, I can still remember that aha moment of the first counselor who, for me, changed my mental outlook towards diabetes. This guy by the name of Mike Bush, really cool and young, and just, the type of guy that a teenager or a preteen would look and say, hey, I want to grow up and be like this guy one day. He drove a cool car.
Yeah.
Just seemed like he would probably have been a ladies' man at the time. That was one of those eye-opening moments for me, like, aha, maybe it didn't change everything, all of my actions immediately. But, from a mental perspective, it changed my outlook.
Okay. Would you say that, so in case, some people are listening and they do not have any experience with camp, obviously the children have to be watched by counselors. And in this situation, specifically related to diabetes, typically the counselors act as mentors or provide some guidance or just education, but not in that typical like school style. Would you say that he was like one person that you looked up to and actually helped you with your journey, or do you have like one mentor in mind from camp, or it doesn't even have to be from camp, but that's how I kind of view it, that really helped you on your diabetes journey?
Yeah, I have probably three that have really,
Oh,
really
wow.
been so influential. Yeah, I know I've been blessed. It's kind of ridiculous all the luck I've been able to have in my life. At camp, I'll single out a guy. His name's Galen Horton, and he was one of my counselors when I was probably 14 and 15 years old. I was at that weird age of trying to figure out all the things that I'm really good at, all the things that I dislike about life and about myself and growing up. It's just that weird time in your life. And so he was just another individual who came to me, and from his background, I could see, hey, you're coming from the same place that I'm in right now. And you've walked down this road. How did you get through this? How did you manage it? And his biggest thing was always providing support, kind of helping me to walk my own path, so that not necessarily am I following all of his footsteps, but it's my own race and I have to run it. And that he was just so encouraging and really shed a lot of his wisdom on me throughout the course of the year, still does. I just talked to him a couple of weeks ago. And I have certainly in more ways than one followed in his footsteps. And that's taking control, managing my diabetes, going to college, having a family, as I mentioned before. We're actually in the same industry now, where we're, both selling medical devices to people that have diabetes. So, it's been a little eerie how I followed in his footsteps somewhat, but he's one of the people, and especially one of the ones at camp that I've been able to follow. Outside of camp, I'd be crazy if I didn't mention both of my parents. My father, first of all, because he was just such an important role model to me. One of the first things that I remember after being diagnosed is coming home and sitting on my bed and just crying. And I don't know why I was crying. I didn't know then. I still don't know now. But, he, of course, knew that his mom and all his aunts and uncles were living with diabetes or had passed from diabetes. And so one of his first messages to me was, hey, we haven't raised any quitters in this house. And it sounds so cliche, but at the same time, it's like, hey, pick yourself up, dust yourself off and you're going to be okay. You're going to deal with this, and so it's just an important message to have heard right then when it's like, holy crap, woe is me. And I think that everybody needs to have that time when they grieve, but then you also have to have, that moment when you're saying, all right, this is what I have to deal with. I'm going to go ahead and deal with it. And of course, my mom, who has been so supportive of every single thing that I've done. And one of the most supportive things she ever did was she came to me when I was 17 years old. I remember it was a Sunday morning. And she said, here, I have to give this to you. This is yours now. And I'm expecting her to give me a present, like a physical gift.
Right.
So, I'm putting my hands out and she's like, nope, I'm giving you control of your diabetes. And when she did that, I was like, oh, I'm starting to understand, because she said that I couldn't have my diabetes managed by her or managed by my doctor, or I couldn't do it for either of them or do it for, anybody else in my life, really. I had to do it for myself. And so that was really the final aha moment for me, where it just became, okay, she's not coming behind me checking my blood sugar. She's not going to ask me if I'm taking my insulin, things like that. It doesn't mean she doesn't care. It means she cares so much. I'm sure that it was literally stressing her to death to be so worried about it. And to say, you have to do this for you, for yourself. Otherwise, it's never going to happen. And that's the truth. And that's a message that I convey to kids every day, a message I convey to a lot of parents every day, because I just think it's so important. People say, hey, when are they going to finally get this? When are they going to start to take control of their life and of their diabetes, of their situation? And I say, I don't know when. They'll have that moment, but whenever they do, that moment has to be about them managing it for themselves.
Yeah, that's really good. So would your mom or would someone else be someone that will always hold you accountable to? Obviously, I love that message. I think it's so powerful and so true. Would you say that up until that point, or even today, like, she would be the person to hold you accountable to making sure, like, when times get tough, you continue making the positive steps in your health? So not necessarily, hovering over you or anything like that, but, all things in life, now that you're older, so it's not even talking about, just checking your blood sugar, but like, just making, healthy choices that not only support your diabetes, but will allow you to continue living for your daughter and for your wife.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, my mom, she's been fantastic and still super supportive, and that relationship has grown over the years. Where I can actually look at both my parents and say, hey, they're among my best friends. They've always had my back, and so they continue to support me, whether it's something related to my family or related to my career or related to my own personal health. I had a conversation, and I won't go into deep detail about this, but maybe a couple of weeks back with my father, where he was, encouraging me to make sure that I was taking care of myself. And he talked about other husbands and fathers who, kind of ignore their own health because they are working so hard for their families. But he said, you don't want to be that individual. So, it's a relationship that continues to this day. And I certainly need that. You have to have a community of support, I believe.
Yeah, absolutely. I agree with that. And it's obvious, kind of making the transition, that I hadn't shared that, we met at camp, but it was in a role as you being camp director, and so, kind of my boss. But what's really cool is obviously Galen had some sort of impact along with the other children, and then your parents kind of making you go to camp, and obviously there was an impact. They left some kind of footprint in your heart, basically, and drawing you back year after year, despite you not wanting to go there. And now you're camp director. How did that exactly happen?
Totally by accident. I don't know how that happened. When I turned 16, I wanted to keep going to camp, and the only way to do that was to be a counselor. And so that's what I initially wanted to sign up for. And I don't think at first I knew what that meant. For me, I initially wanted to keep going to see my friends and to have fun at camp. The transition happened for me, of course, when I realized, hey, I'm in this role now and I'm able to actually give something back to the next Justin or the next Galen or the next Hope, who is probably coming to this camp and saying, hey, I've just been diagnosed, or I've been diagnosed for a while and I am struggling with this, help me get on the right track. And so that's when my approach to camp changed. And I say, I want to make sure that I'm giving the most back to each one of these kids, making sure that their experience is right, that they feel supported, that they know that they can still have all of the successes they dreamed of in life, even though they've been diagnosed with this disease. That diabetes is not going to be that label that's going to hold them down and rule over their lives. So I just kind of stuck with camp long enough that I was fortunate to be around the previous camp director, a guy by the name of Rick. And, he asked me if I had interest in directing the camp. And of course I did, because it's a place that I cherish and love so deeply. I know that it changed my life, and I know that it still changes lives to this day. So I wanted to be there to make sure that it continued to serve its purpose, and that it would always follow that mission of, supporting and improving the lives of children living with diabetes.
Yeah. Okay. I like that a lot. So like I've mentioned, you're kind of in a new category. Typically, we place a lot of emphasis on the person with the label. So as we've spent the first part of this explaining your journey, but a lot of times we forget about the people who don't have the label that are trying to help that person. And so you're kind of in both camps, because you have the diabetes label, but you're also now both in your full-time job as well as camp director, helping in a new way, specifically, basically you're running this whole community that changed your life, changed my life, and changes 200 kids' lives every summer. So how does it feel to help people with this label by helping kind of run a community and providing them with this resource?
Most of the time it's extremely tiring physically. But emotionally, it's gratifying. It really refuels me emotionally to know that I'm part of something that is so much bigger than myself. To know that I'm involved with a kid who may have a great grasp on his diabetes, but just needs to hear from somebody that he's loved, or to know that there's a young lady out there who is coming from a great family situation, but she's brand new to diabetes. And so she needs to come to camp and see somebody who she can say, oh, this is going to be my role model, and I can actually manage this disease, so that she has that positive outlook. We get kids from so many walks of life that we don't know what it is that they're going to need from us, but being there to meet them wherever they are and provide what it is that they need in their life, whether it's a hug, whether it's a pat on the back, whether it's, an educational moment about managing diabetes. I love doing that. And then, for the staff, it's, I feel like we're probably in the same boat. We have a lot of counselors and medical staff that come to us from all kinds of walks of life. And a lot of them return. Our medical director has 25 years in camp, just like I do. So it's fantastic for us to still be able to impact the staff lives as well, where, so many of our staff will say, hey, what are the camp dates for next year? Because I'm definitely going to put it on my calendar. They're going to take a week off of work and away from their families to come to camp to do something that's going to be about more than themselves. That's just, it's really powerful. And so that's what keeps me going, because, it's certainly not the paycheck. Mm-hmm. That's a joke. You're supposed to laugh at that part.
I mean, I was in a serious mood. It was a good story.
There you go.
But you're right. It's not the paycheck at all, for sure, specifically in this situation. Well, okay. So with you doing that, and then, I'm a counselor now, and I definitely see how impactful it's been on the children. I mean, including myself. For you as like camp director, where you basically, you're like this, I'll call you a helicopter parent. It sounds very negative, but you're all seeing, you're omniscient.
Oh, that's cool.
Yeah. What do you specifically see? Like, what differences do you see in these children that now have this newfound community and guidance that they most likely didn't have before?
I think this might sound crazy, or I hope not conceited or egocentric, but I see a lot of myself in these kids, and it's just from the experience that they have, where a lot of them are coming from all walks of life, and they have all kinds of interests that are so varied and so different. And for a moment, whether it's a brief moment or one that just kind of hangs around them all the time, they are feeling like diabetes is going to impact that, and it's going to prevent them from doing whatever it is that they had in mind. Whether that was growing up and being a movie star or a football star, or family and goals like that. There's that brief moment where they might think they're going to be impacted by diabetes to the point where they're not going to have a say in it. So giving them that opportunity to realize that they can be independent, responsibly manage their own diabetes, that's the change that I see at camp. And then even more so in the weeks and months after camp, I've received, tons of thank you calls and emails and cards and stuff like that from parents that say, little Jimmy or Susie, that their management has improved so much that they're taking ownership of it. That things that mom and dad had to do before at home for them, they're like, oh, I started doing this at camp. I'm okay to do it by myself now. Mm-hmm. And that's, obviously a great relief for mom and dad, because it means, hey, my child is growing. They're going to be able to actually take care and manage this disease on their own one day. And so that's, I think that goes back to my mom being like, hey, you have to do this for you. And so getting those kids to that point where they are taking their diabetes management, seriously, and they're doing it for themselves, there is probably no greater success that we have from the week at camp.
That's awesome. I love that. Would you say that moment, is there one factor that may be a bigger player? So being in just that environment with a bunch of similar people with a similar label, or would you say some of the guidance that they have throughout, which would be more, that mentoring role of the counselors?
Yeah, I'd say it's the people. We could have camp anywhere, and you've been to a lot of places with this same group of people, and that it almost doesn't matter. We don't even need four walls and a roof most of the time. We just need to have this group of people together. Mm-hmm. And the positive energy that they have and the deep ability to care and give parts of their lives to somebody else to bring them up. That's what makes the difference. We're fortunate that we're at a cool place that's got, water slides and zip lines and all kinds of activities that the kids love to do. But, if we don't have the right people, then we're going to fall short of those goals.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, so camp is a part of the American Diabetes Association, and that is obviously outside of just children. With your history with being involved with kind of the diabetes community at greater spectrum, I guess, how have you seen opportunities arise for communities and, again, guidance, mentorships for all ages? Is there anything in particular that has stood out to you for people that aren't children, but resources that are out there for them?
Yeah, what stands out to me now is through social media, that there are all kinds of different groups that people can join. Sorry, that's my dog in the background.
There's a dog interruption every interview we've ever had.
Man, she knows what she's doing. So social media is what's really standing out to me now. I am recently moved to Charlotte, North Carolina from Raleigh. But when I was in Raleigh, I joined a Facebook group for type 1 adults. And it's like professional type 1 adults. I think that's the name of the Facebook group. And the plan was originally to do like sporadic meetings and stuff like that, which never really happened. And they weren't like meetings like a support group. It's like, hey, let's all get together and, go to a Durham Bulls baseball game and hang out or something like that. And maybe that happened, maybe it didn't. That could just be me being in the clouds.
But clearly you were not taking advantage of that one.
Yeah, no, didn't do the meetup. But what they do, and they're very active with it, is, just kind of lob a question out to the group and get answers on it. Like, hey, have you ever used this pump? Or what do you think about, this new study that came out from the ADA or from the JDRF? And this is what it says. Does any of this sound promising? And so it's a place to have some interaction. And, most important to me is that word community. I think that the camp that you and I are most familiar with is part of that community. I don't think that it's the entire community. I always encourage people, parents, kids, seek your community of support. So social media is one way to get it. It's not the only way. There's definitely the in-person meetups and stuff like that you're able to do. I know that there are quite a few groups that now are putting some more stuff together for young adults, because they're kind of that group that gets ignored. Once you hit that 18 to 35, they're kind of the gap, the forgotten group. So I know that they're being prioritized much more highly than they have been in the past. It was always kids, and then I can't even call them old because I'm almost 35 now, but you're over 35 group that would have been prioritized in the past. But now that mid adult to young adult, they're starting to be prioritized much higher.
Mm. I like the concept of social media because pretty much anyone could start a Facebook group. And although you said there's a place for social media and a place for that in-person meetup, whether you take advantage of it or not, but it's nice that you could at least start there. And I like the concept of actually doing something in person that isn't diabetes related, because it's kind of like when you're at camp. It's my most prominent example I can think of, and you're doing all this like normal stuff related to the lake slide or horseback riding or all these things that kind of take your mind off of whatever diagnosis or label you may have. So I actually really like that concept of starting with social media and maybe hopefully being able to translate that into something in person that's not even related most of the time.
Yeah, it's pretty cool. It's very cool.
Yeah, I like that. So I'm trying to think of the best way to say this, because it might be repetitive what you just said. So if it is, you can just say what you just said. But what would be your one piece of advice for someone who currently doesn't have a community like you and I may know, or they don't have a mentor or someone to hold them accountable or guide them through this health journey?
Yeah. The one thing that I would encourage, and this is going to sound crazy, but network. And I actually was just talking to somebody about this the other day. It's almost like a job search, right? I mean, you can send your resume out a million different places, but, networking is almost always the best way to make sure that you're able to, get your foot in that door, and not just get your foot in the door, but get your foot in the right door. Mm-hmm. So, if they have that interest, maybe asking a friend or asking a family member, hey, do you know of anybody, that XYZ, or asking, your healthcare professional, because they're out there, they're somewhere out there. Google is a great resource. The internet is incredibly dangerous. So, I prefer to always be able to ask somebody, because there's nobody who is going through anything alone. It certainly may feel like it at times, but you really have to be a little courageous, a little independent, and take that first step and put yourself out there. It will benefit them in the long run. It'll benefit them in the short run too.
Yeah, absolutely. Speaking of being courageous, I am a big mantra quote person. I can't even say I really have a favorite quote, even though I ask everyone I interview what their favorite quote is. But do you have a kind of favorite quote or a mantra that keeps you going?
Yeah. And you probably have heard this one before. It's an old John Wooden quote. John Wooden, the basketball coach at UCLA. And the quote is, don't let what you cannot do interfere with what you can do. And that one's just always has spoke to me just so personally, because I have diabetes and I cannot do anything about that. My body is not going to regulate sugar in it. It's not going to, it's not going to produce insulin and get it to where it's supposed to go. I can't do anything about that. I could let that interfere with everything else in my life, but I'm not going to, because what I can do is I can regularly check my blood sugar. I can regularly make sure that I'm counting carbs for the insulin I'm taking, make sure that I'm taking the right amount of insulin. I can regularly attempt to have, some kind of balanced diet so that I'm not eating all junk food all the time. It just speaks so quickly to me about people being much more focused on a lack of control than actually saying, hey, I'm able to control some things. So if you only focus on what you can't control, then it's going to adversely affect the things that you actually can control.
Absolutely. That is probably one of the best quotes to end on because it's right in line with what I believe as well. And that's the whole concept about being able to live beyond, kind of integrating it in your life and not allowing it to start you. So that was a perfect way to end this. I appreciate your time so much, Justin. I'm sure we'll talk more here throughout after this.
Yes.
But I think that this information is super valuable, and it goes beyond just children and just camp. And what really made me excited to have you on the show was the fact that you have been living with a label, type 1 diabetes, for so long, and your journey, wasn't always pretty, and you probably wouldn't have chosen community if you didn't have that accountability, I guess you could call it, from your parents. And that community grew into you now leading the community and it carrying not even just inside camp, but throughout your life and everything that you do, like mimicking Galen's life pretty much. You basically stole his life.
No, he's got way too many kids. I don't want that.
He does have a lot of children. And just being able to really reflect and realize that you're not alone, and exactly everything you said, which I think all comes from you being so familiar and so close to knowing what a community feels like and having those people pour into you. So this was extremely valuable, and hopefully, perhaps, maybe, if we're getting along, you might just be welcomed back. We'll see.
We'll see. Well, Hope, thank you for having me. It's an honor, seriously, to be asked to join you on something like this. I love what you're doing because it is so selfless, and you are really motivating other people, and I think that's so important. You don't. There was, oh my gosh, what was that Muhammad Ali quote from? Oh man. It's like
I just said I don't know quotes. I just like them.
Yeah, nope. Gosh, I know you asked me. So your service to others is the rent that you pay for being here on this earth, and that one, is certainly profound. He's got a lot of good ones, but that one's profound because this is one of those things where you are being a service to others and motivating them to make sure that they are being the best individual they can possibly be. I love it. I love how you're encouraging people to love their lives. So I'm incredibly proud of you and the job that you're doing.
Well, thank you. That was unexpected, and I absolutely loved it. I hope that's my goal, is to serve others and to help them just realize that, they're not their labels and they can live beyond. So I greatly appreciate that, Justin. Clearly, you have, some part in what I've become because you have basically known me since I was diagnosed at age 12. So I appreciate your kind words, and I hope that I continue to be able to serve.
Yep, I've got no doubt.
Well, thank you so much, and have an amazing day, and I will talk to you soon.
All right, sounds good. Thank you.
No problem.
All right.